Okay, well, I want you to introduce Andy Hill. He's a docent, leader, and a member of the Midway, the USS Midway Speakers Bureau. And he's an example of, a great example of the talented volunteers who come and give their time to share the history of the Midway. And we're fortunate to have such a remarkable museum. Have you been to, how many have been there? Have we been there? Good. And to have Andy here to share one of the most exciting things, well, one of the many exciting things that happen on the Midway. Andy, this is yours.
All right, thanks, Edwina. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Hill. I'm a docent on the Midway, as Edwina said. Well, we're going to talk today a little bit about an adventure that USS Midway had. This wasn't a wartime adventure, actually a peacetime adventure. One of those humanitarian operations that the Navy does a lot of that you don't hear too much about. This one was pretty popular, rescuing 3,000 people from South Vietnam. Some of you may not realize there was a South Vietnam, so we're going to talk about how South Vietnam came to not be, okay? And more importantly, what the Midway did for the people who happen to be in that situation. So I have PowerPoint slides, and we're going to be talking to a Zoom audience here. And I have a special guest, Rob Boyd, who came in. So I'll mention him a little bit later in my presentation. So let's get started. Okay. So a little bit about this slide. So this was the 50th anniversary slide of the USS Midway's recognition of Operation Frequent Wind. Every year in April, we recognize this. This 50th year recognition was in 2025. A little bit more about me. When I'm not a docent and I dress up, this is what I look like. As Edwina said, I'm a shift watch leader. So most of the time I'm the shift watch leader on Saturday afternoons. Today, it's a little bit different. I took my shift and I came to you. When I was serving in the Navy, I retired as a lieutenant commander, as Gulf War veteran. I worked with the defense industry as a senior principal engineer for a company called L3 Communications. They've changed, so I think it's now L3 Harris. Okay, but same company. And then I retired from the U.S. Army as a civilian computer engineer. And I was actually educated at one point. I can at least have a piece of paper that says that. This is our Operation Frequent Wind exhibit on the USS Midway. What you see is a very small aircraft. That aircraft actually landed on the flight deck. And that may not sound like such a big deal till you realize that these aircraft were never designed to land on flight decks. And particularly during Operation Frequent Wind, when it was very hectic, it was a very dangerous operation. So we tell the story not only of the aircraft, but we tell the story of the people inside of it. And we tell the story about the Midway people who were helpful in getting this aircraft to land on the deck and getting those refugees from South Vietnam to safety. So that aircraft has a really important role in some of the stories that you might hear people who came from South Vietnam as refugees tell, because a lot of them have stories similar to this. That wasn't the only way they got to the ship. Some people came by helicopter. So we had a lot of these, and they look like green Army helicopters, okay? But whose Army? Well, these were the South Vietnamese Army helicopters. They weren't North Vietnamese, they weren't US, they were South Vietnamese. And if you didn't have a way to get out of South Vietnam, this might be your last ticket out. So they crammed these helicopters full of people. And at the time they belonged to South Vietnam, the following day, they would belong to North Vietnam as the Saigon fell. Paris Peace Accords. January 27th, 1973. Yes, sir. Oh, sure. January 27th, 1973. So if you were at the Paris Peace Accords, well, you'd be probably a little bit older than me. Okay. The Paris Peace Accords were an agreement between North and South Vietnam and to restore peace by ending a war. How do you do that? Well, you have a ceasefire in place to withdraw troops. You have a four-power joint military commission to oversee the ceasefire. You have all the military bases that the U.S. had constructed to be dismantled within 60 days. No introduction of new troops or advisors by either Vietnamese party. No further acts of force on the ground, in the air, on the sea, or by any of the parties. Both sides allowed to replace arms and equipment destroyed under supervision of the commission and return all captured military personnel and foreign civilians within 60 days. Now, this was important because the U.S. wanted the prisoners of war who had been captives in North Vietnam, some for a very long time, they wanted them released. And so they made this a condition of the Paris Peace Accords. And then the last one, probably most importantly, is to exercise South Vietnam's right of self-determination. In other words, they wanted to join the North, they could. If they wanted to stay an independent country, they could. It was their right to self-determine. So North and South Vietnam were to begin peaceful negotiations on establishing normal relations and reunification. Okay? And this has happened many times in history, so I mean, nothing new here. So what I'm going to talk about is, for just a second, the prisoner of war, the U.S. captives that were held by North Vietnam. And I'm going to talk about this because it's now a new exhibit on the Midway. So if you haven't been to the Midway lately, okay, we just opened this exhibit, okay? And this exhibit tells a really interesting story. And the really interesting story it tells is what some of those captives had to go through, okay? Now, admittedly, it was a war. Admittedly, they deserve to be captives. But, you know, when you go through the exhibit, you probably would agree nobody deserves to be treated that way, okay? So we talk about 11 captives in particularly. Those 11 captives were actually aviators that flew from the deck of the Midway and didn't return. Their aircraft were shot down. Some were actually believed missing in action. Some were actually written off as killed in action. And it wasn't until we started getting reports that we knew that that wasn't the case. So once they were repatriated, you know, some of these people had their stories to tell too. But this is a new exhibit, and I won't spoil that for you. Just come down the ship and see. North and South Vietnam. So if you look at a map today, it doesn't look at all like this. It's one long country. Vietnam's kind of shaped like a dragon. Sometimes people call it that. But that bottom part was separated by a border they called the demilitarized zone. And all those cities below the demilitarized zone were South Vietnamese. And all those cities above North Vietnam were North Vietnamese cities. So he had two capitals, had one in Saigon and one in Hanoi. So I just put a star over the one in Saigon. Can't see it, I just made it blink at you. And then I had another capital in Hanoi, red star, and I'll make that blink at you too. And then you see the official Paris Peace Accords agreement with some signatures on the bottom. The interesting thing about this particular piece of paper is the signatures on the bottom were signed by the POWs that got released, okay? And it's actually on display at the Smithsonian in Virginia, so you can go to the museum and see this. The bad part about this is that peace agreement exploded. It went away. It didn't last very long. 2 years later, April 3rd, 1975, ceasefire and the peace agreements were broken. So the spring offensive by the North Vietnamese, they basically had restored their armor, had restored their power, and they headed south And so everybody that lived on that south end of the demilitarized zone was basically being pushed farther and farther south. So they were basically taking them out of the northern military districts back towards Saigon. And the important point was kind of a sticking point for some people in the US. We didn't want to have another war in Vietnam, so we didn't provide any support. So this is what it looks like. So you can imagine if they said, hey, everybody in Southern California, leave Southern California now. This is what it would look like, right? Freeways would be crowded. Maybe not like this, but it would be crowded, okay? This was chaos. This was not something people planned. They had a peace agreement, right? So confusion reigns. As the retreat continues through March and April, the rainy season, right? I mean, in South Vietnam, you get a lot of rain. The rain makes the riverbanks swell. When the riverbanks swell, the roads become impassable. And any place where there's a bridge, well, that's just too bad. Okay. Become bottlenecks. This can upset you. This can upset some people. These people look very upset. And I have no idea about what they're upset over, but you know, they've lost everything they've had. They probably lost some family members and told to head south and never return. Or if they did, it would cost them their lives. So even the Army, big tanker ships were contracted. They load all these Army soldiers from South Vietnam up on the decks of the tanker ship and they sail them all south. Why sail them instead of having them march? Well, like I said, the roads were impassable. You couldn't get through. So this was the only way that they could bring them south. So these soldiers were particularly in the Da Nang area, which is very close to the demilitarized zone. But this was the plan the North had all along, was to basically move everybody into Saigon, and then in the last and final action, to basically surround Saigon, overwhelm the military forces, and once you did that, what would you do next? Well, you'd have the country then. It'd be all yours. So this map is kind of interesting. Provenance of this map is actually in a museum in Hanoi. And this map is basically essentially the final plan. If you're looking at colors, yellow is South Vietnam, red is North Vietnam. Okay. So the US finally says, well, we have to do something. So what are we going to do? Okay. Well, we certainly want to get our people out. And where there's a way to do it, they're going to basically allow a limited number of South Vietnamese refugees to come out with our own people. But the problem is affiliation. If you have an affiliation with a US citizen, we'll get you out. If you don't have one of those affiliations, you might not get out at all. So this was kind of a debatable strategy, but that's how they did it. So March 31st, the Midway departs Yokosuka, Japan, for a routine deployment. And at the time this happened, Midway had just changed her home port from Alameda, California to Yokosuka, Japan. Yokosuka, Japan, just for the geography lesson that it deserves, just south of Tokyo, okay? So the Midway frequently, you know, in the Western Pacific was there to basically maintain peace and stability. So that's what her normal deployment would require. So on April 5th, 2 Marine helicopter squadrons landed aboard Midway off Okinawa, which was another military base primarily for the Marines, and take a ride to Subic Bay in the Philippines, which was another military strategic base, for transfer to the USS Hancock, which was another carrier still homeported in Alameda, okay? And the amphibious helicopter carrier USS Okinawa, which is a little bit different than an aircraft carrier, only because it's designed to carry helicopters. The Hancock and the Midway were not really designed to carry helicopters like that. They were designed to carry not only helicopters, but fixed wing aircraft as well. And they're going to fly the evacuation missions later in the month. So Operation Eagle Pull was not about Saigon. It was about Phnom Penh, which you might realize is Cambodia, okay? So we were going to evacuate embassy personnel from Cambodia. So Eagle Pull flights begin. They take them to 7 fleet ships near Cambodia, and 326 people are evacuated. You could almost call this a practice run. Then Midway gets assigned to Operation Frequent Wind, which is the evacuation effort for South Vietnam. So Midway is ordered on April 18th. The joint forces tasked with the evacuation of South Vietnam. Now, this is an important date, okay? Because this is when everything suddenly changed. Because originally the plan to evacuate South Vietnam wasn't this at all. Midway was kind of like not the plan A, not the plan B, not even the plan C. This was like plan D. So the Midway was there just in case. So more than half of the ship's aircraft, hundreds of the crew were offloaded to make room for the evacuees. And then Midway is ordered to proceed at high speed to the south coast of Vietnam. And look, 10 days later, or 2 days later, 10 heavy Air Force helicopters and support personnel arrive aboard the USS Midway. Now, the Air Force isn't used to landing on aircraft carrier flight decks, and they still don't usually. So this requires some training. So they'll train in shipboard flight operations, learn how to communicate with Navy people in the air traffic control tower, learn how to obey the rules when they land on the flight deck, and prepare for evacuation. So next question is, so how will the U.S. get out? Well, number one, we don't want the Russians to come in, which was then the Soviet Union, and interrupt this. So we got the Russians, the Soviet Union, the government of the Soviet Union, to agree with a safe evacuation and to begin having political discussions about how we were going to get out of this mess. Secretary Kissinger, who's the Secretary of State at the time, receives a reply, gets the assurance. They want to reestablish the Paris Peace Accords, and the U.S. just promises that they won't take any military action against anything that's happened up to this point. President Ford, who was the sitting U.S. president at the time, Richard Nixon, had left office. President Ford took office, ordered the reduction of personnel in the Saigon area, and Air America, which was not an airline, it's actually a covert wing of the CIA that was used to transfer people out of Vietnam, was actually used to help make those arrangements. And they could do things that airlines normally don't do, like evacuate people from the top of hotels in the city of Saigon. So this is what Midway looks like. We turn a big aircraft carrier designed to launch fixed-wing jets into a helicopter carrier. So, and these are the big Air Force heavy lift helicopters that I mentioned. So you see they've got a big single rotor, they've got a big cargo door in the back, and they have in-flight refueling probes that allow them to stay in the air for a very long time. The Marine helicopters did not have the in-flight refueling probe, so that made a difference. The Air Force heavy lift helicopters were called Green Giant. And if you go to the freezer section of your grocery store, you might still find some Green Giant vegetables. Okay. So what's the Navy doing in all this? Well, all these ships show up, okay? And it's almost too hard to read the fine print here, but I want to talk about 3 ships in particular that I've already mentioned. I've got the USS Okinawa, I've got the USS Hancock, and the USS Midway. So let's just put circles around those 3 ships. So that first circle is the USS Hancock. That second circle, that's the USS Midway. And the third circle is the USS Okinawa. And then all the other ships around it would be used to transfer the refugees from the big ships over to smaller ships where they could be removed and given comfort and safety, while the big ships continued to bring in more refugees. And now we're just awaiting orders of when to launch. So I happen to be stationed on the USS Enterprise, so a shameless photo op for the Enterprise is flying the first F-14 Tomcats during the Vietnam War. I was at the Top Gun movie show last night on the USS Midway, the 40th anniversary, and that was all about Tomcats, but Tomcats did fly in combat during Vietnam, just not the actual combat, okay? And then this is what the business end of a Air Force heavy lift helicopter, that jolly green, looks like when you're looking at the nose. So that big two refueling probes sticking out of the front. Well, I talked about Plan A. Well, Plan A goes away as soon as the North Vietnamese decide that they want to bomb Tan Son Nhut Air Base, because that was not just an air base, it was also the international airport for Saigon. So all these people that said, well, I'll just take a flight out. Well, you're not going to take a flight out now because there's big bomb craters in the middle of your runway. You can see these people are, some of them are running towards the fire, which is what we do when there's a fire. And then other people are running away from the fire because they know what's going to happen if the bombs go off with this. So I'm not sure which is the case in this picture photo. But you have to have an evacuation plan. So this is our evacuation plan. We have laid out certain points. The bus will come to pick you up. And when the bus shows up, you show them your credentials and you'll be able to get your ride to Tan Son Nhut Air Base that now has craters in its runway, right? So this isn't going to work very well, okay? But here's the U.S. Embassy building. And this is where essentially all the U.S. State Department, probably some of those Air America people, and also the defense attaché, which is actually the military people who support the State Department. So I'll talk about the defense attaché office, but that's important to know. And the defense attaché office was actually manned out at Tan Son Nhut Air Base in a place that we call the Alamo, okay? Well, supposedly where we're going to make our last stand, okay? So there it is. There's a picture of the Alamo where we're going to make our last stand. And these buildings are much larger than they seem. Okay, these buildings are like some big office complex that's probably comparable to the Pentagon. Okay, so when we look at these buildings, you notice some areas around the buildings have the letters LZ. That means it's a landing zone. It's big enough for us to land a helicopter. So the idea is that we'll land a helicopter and get you out of there. Okay? So this is what the Alamo looks like on a nice calm day with the flags waving in the breeze. That flag closest to the front of the screen, that's a South Vietnamese flag. And that flag seen a little bit farther in the distance, that's a US flag. And you can see those big concrete barriers. Well, that's to keep somebody from attacking your headquarters, okay? So a little bit of protection goes a long way. Okay? And these people look like they're waiting for the bus to pick them up, because in fact they are. They don't know all the things that are going on because, you know, the news isn't providing a lot of details, okay? Well, last thing you want to have is panic in the streets, panic in the city. So these people look relatively calm, okay? And we're going to evacuate about 5,595 Vietnamese and third country nationals, in addition to the 1,373 Americans flown out that made history during Operation Frequent Wind. So when I start talking about people, that's the people I'm talking about, okay? So what song were they playing on that very warm April day? They were playing White Christmas. And anybody that knew what that song meant knew it was time to go ride the bus and get out of town, because when that song started playing, they knew these were your orders to evacuate. And that's how they signaled without causing panic in the streets. Of course, people are lousy at keeping secrets. You'll never guess why they're playing White Christmas. Okay, so now they show up at the embassy building and they've got two handfuls of whatever is the most valuable thing in the world. And I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about if you had to go back to your house and pack two handfuls of personal items and everything else you have to leave behind. It's a tough journey, right? I mean, you have to prioritize. So the Marines show up, and you're not sure if some of these people said, well, my prized possession are my handguns, okay? So they have to make sure they're not armed. But they have to be polite about it. Of course, Marines and politeness don't normally go together well. So this is a photo taken by one of the Marines of what it looked like evacuating the South Vietnamese and the American refugees by helicopter. So this is the group of 60 that's running out to the helicopter. And you can see the rotor spinning here. Okay. If you're a little too tall, you'll get a haircut. Okay. Only 60 people in the helicopter. Yes, sir.
No, I was gonna ask how many people did it hit? 60?
Only 60 people in the helicopter.
Only 60.
Right. Because we got a Marine with a gun who's very good at counting. Okay.
Right.
And you're not going to argue with him over a math problem, are you? Okay. So you'll find out that math works differently depending on who the pilot is. Okay. So this is the heavy lift helicopters using the embassy parking lot. And that's actually the embassy building in the background. So, and you can see they're danger close to those helicopter rotors. So that's another thing you have to worry about is that, well, how can we do this safely and efficiently? By the way, total chaos outside the gates of the embassy right now. Okay, that I'm not showing the pictures of. So let's go down the street, because I heard at the Hotel Gia, Air America is hauling some people out. So now would be a good time for you to ask your question. So how many people will this Huey helicopter hold? Okay. But probably the more important question is how many people can that ladder that lifts you up to the Huey helicopter hold? Okay. Because it looks like that ladder is about to snap, doesn't it? Okay. So very famous photograph, by the way. And a lot of people believe this photo was taken of the evacuees from the U.S. Embassy, but I just gave you the correct story. This hotel was frequented by the CIA, and so people that were told to go there were probably friends of the CIA. Okay. By the way, this helicopter is now in the U.S. Okay. It's owned by private ownership. Some guy in Alabama. Okay. So the refugees are told to bring only what you carry. So when they arrive to the USS Midway, they're only bringing what they carry. But a flight deck on an aircraft carrier is a dangerous place. It's probably the last place you want to be without a cranial. Now, you see that sailor that's kind of behind the group of refugees? He's wearing a cranial helmet. He's got goggles. He's got all kinds of protective gear. If he gets blown over the side, he's got a float coat. So you're going to make special precautions that these poor refugees don't get too close to an engine and don't get blown over the side because they have no protection whatsoever. So then you have to get processed. Now, this is not your normal line to be processed. If you look within the crowd, you see these bayonets sticking up in the sky. Well, that's just the Marines to say, hey, you know, if you brought any contraband, now would be a good time to tell us about it, okay? And so, I mean, you can stand on the flight deck of the Midway today here in San Diego, right next to a helicopter like that, and pretend like you just arrived in San Diego from South Vietnam. And we actually have a ceremony every April on the Midway where people do exactly that. Now, to answer your question about, so how many people can you carry in a helicopter? Yeah, well, this guy has a different view of the world, okay? But he's probably saying, look, I'm not going to leave any of my family members behind. And some of these people have pretty big families, okay? So I'm just going to call it that. Um, the the older looking woman who's kind of in the front here, she's actually the great aunt of one of our docents. And I actually had invited her to come to this talk because I was going to recognize her here. But if you come to the Midway, her name is Stephanie Den, and she was one of the youngsters, okay? But when she saw this photo, she says, oh, that's my great grandmother, or my great aunt, sorry. Great grandmother's sister, okay? So if you look at the looks on their faces, I don't really have to tell you what they're thinking. They're probably thinking this is a bad day, but they're also thinking, but how unfair that I get my ticket to freedom and the people who didn't make it on the helicopter didn't. So there's a lot of survivor guilt going on here, okay? And if you haven't dealt with survivor guilt, it's a real thing. And this is a picture where I give another photo credit. Rob is actually pictured in one of these photos. Would you like to come up here and just talk for a minute about the photo?
Sure.
Okay, come on up. Come around this way so you don't trip over the wire.
Hi, my name is Rob Boyd, and I was part of
Yeah,
the
sure.
operation. I was part of Operation Frequent Wind back in. Again, we covered the dates from 29 April 75 to 30 April. And what this picture depicts is we had to clear the deck for that little aircraft that you saw earlier. That was Bong Lee and his family. Now that's a two-place spotter aircraft, okay? And in the back of the second seat is a flare locker. Okay, so the pilot is flying over an area of interest, and he says, okay, those are bad guys. And so he flies by, the guy in the back seat pulls out a flare, drops a flare, smoke, and then the F-4s can roll in and take care of that business. Okay, that's how the airplane is set up. Well, Bong Lee, he wasn't interested in that. He knew how to fly the plane. So he put his wife in the second seat. It's a tandem. Bong Lee, wife, and 5 kids. Okay. The baby was in her lap, and the 4 boys were sitting in the flare locker. Okay. That was one loaded Cessna aircraft. Now, fortunately, that 01 is just loaded with horsepower. It's just designed that way, not like your Cessna 150 at the airstrip, okay, at the airport. So he loaded up and took off. And again, to reflect back, when these guys were picking up their family, they're pilots, they're Huey pilots. Those were leased aircraft from the United States. All those helicopters were owned by us, but we leased them to them. So they were very good pilots, very, very good. So what they did was they absolutely knew their weight and balance, and they knew their fuel consumption. And from where they were at to the ship wasn't a huge jump, okay? So they could get a lot more passengers. You trade off fuel for weight. It's all weight, doesn't matter. And so they were going out there on skinny fuel and heavy load. And so we were unloading. I was on the flight deck. I was with that crew. We were unloading people from those helicopters. And on one occasion, maybe two, that was the only one I was exposed to. We unloaded 50 personnel. Now, again, their stature wasn't great. Nobody was 6'2", and nobody weighed 250 pounds. But at the end of the day, with all the little babies and so forth, we counted 50 coming off of the Huey, and it wasn't uncommon at all. 30 to 50 was common. That's a 16-passenger combat complete aircraft. So there was only 16 soldiers with gear in that helicopter. That's what it was rated for. Now, again, full fuel, the whole 9 yards. But at the end of the difference is huge. So we had all of these helicopters, and there might be a slide here where you see all these Hueys on there, and you'll get to that. But all those aircraft all over that flight deck, we had to get them. There's no place to put them. They were landed. They were coming out. We popped up. We looked out, and the sky was just full of these aircraft. They were full of them, and they were full of people. And they knew the second day is when they all came out. They said, we can land on this aircraft carrier out there between us and the Hancock. And the Okinawa was out there working it too. They were more shuttle than we were. We were a platform, and Hancock was a platform. And then our aircraft scattered them out into the fleet to get them onto ships to get them down to the Philippines. So at this point, we got word from Vern, our air boss. This got this bird dog is circling around. He drops a note out. Long story short, he drops a note out of his pistol holster, and he says, and the note read, and it's still in our exhibit. That exhibit you saw earlier, in that queue, that cubicle area right there. That note is on there, and it says, if you can clear out those aircraft, I can land on your runway. We said, okay, we'll take you for your word. So Vern said, we got to clear the flight deck. And the admiral that was running the show, our Vern and our Captain Chambers said, okay, clear the flight. Vern, give me a ready deck, which meant we got to clear a place for the aircraft to land. At that point, the admiral says, no. You're going to put that aircraft in the water, and we'll just go out and swim and go get them. And that wouldn't have worked. Okay, one, he was overweight, and it would have flipped. That's how it goes. The sea was not really easy, but a little bit choppy. Never would have made it. Maybe Bung Lee would have got out. That was it. Everybody else would have perished. So Captain Chambers made a career-ending decision and said, nix that. I'll take this one, boss, for the team. Give me a ready deck. And so at that point, all hands on deck, push helicopters over the side. So the flight deck boss told us which ones we could clear. So we cozied up everything else, and then anything that was left on the angle went over the side. I don't know what that number was. Some say 7, some say 2. I only saw 2. These 2. Well, actually, not that one. I think that one is this one. But then there was a big 47, a huge, big aircraft, different kind of than an H-53. So we pushed them off the side, made room for Bong Lee. And I tell you what, it was like he'd landed on him 100 times a day. He floated it in. Now we gave him a little bit of help. Aircraft fly with relative airspeed. Okay. So the more air going under the wings, the lighter it gets. You can land it easier. So we gave him 30 knots. Okay. He flew in, settled in, and he couldn't land. He was floating. So he pulled the thrower, chopped the power. Now you've got no way out. If something went wrong, you can't recover. Pulls back the power, and it settles down. And at that point, the flight deck boss says, recover them. And what that meant was we went and grabbed the aircraft. Now this propeller's still moving. So you grab a landing gear, you grab a wing, you do everything you can to keep that guy from going off the edge. Because he was moving. And so we stopped him, and that was pretty much some story of that. And I'd go on for days, so gotta replace him.
So we'll continue the talk here. I've got a few more slides. But the other thing I wanted to point out in this photo, most of the photos that were sent to the US were in black and white. So a lot of the US citizens thought, well, what are you throwing all these American helicopters away for, when the color depiction clearly shows that the markings on the aircraft are South Vietnamese. So there was some confusion. Even Captain Chambers, the commanding officer of the USS Midway, his own mother said, why'd you throw away all those US aircraft for? And we had Captain Chambers come to the ship and tell us this story. So I had it firsthand. Okay. So here's the watchword. We're going to flee to escape, a long prison term, or death if you stay. So that pretty much doesn't give you a lot of options. So you can kind of see where people would decide. Now there were some people who actually were released later from South Vietnam, and they've settled here as refugees as well. But this is the famous bird dog landing that Rob just talked about. They say he caught the number 3 wire. He really didn't catch a wire because he didn't have a way. But as you've heard, the crew of the USS Midway on the flight deck became his number 3 wire. Okay. carrying his wife and 5 children. So if somebody asks you that question to get your junior pilot wings, you now know the answer. Okay. Now, this is another look into the future, right? You look at these people's faces, they have no idea what's going to happen next. I mean, they may have just gotten themselves, out of the frying pan and now they're in the fire. I mean, they don't know. Okay. So it's really important for us to basically, walk a little bit of distance in their shoes, if not a whole mile. The other thing was the food. So you serve food at the USS Midway. It's designed to, keep people like Rob and me, well nourished. Okay. You give this to somebody who's only eaten rice and maybe very little meat, is mostly fish. They get upset stomachs. We're basically giving them food that their system just can't process. And so little kid asking his mom, is it okay if I eat this? Because they've heard that the food will make you sick. Okay. About that scene that Rob was asking me if I was going to mention. So here's the picture of the helicopters coming in. You can see, and they just keep coming. Okay. And then this is a picture of what happens after they discharge their passengers. Some pilots would take off in the helicopter, get far enough away from the ship where it could be safely ditched in the sea. And then the pilot just jumps out of the helicopter, lands in the ocean, and then hopefully somebody comes to pick him up before the sharks or somebody else does. Okay. So they're doing this on purpose. And for you folks on Zoom that can't see it, I just toggled it to highlight where the guy was. So some relics of the war. So this is one of these really big helicopters, okay, like we have on the Midway, okay. This is what they call the Sea Knight, right?
46.
Yeah, 46. So these big 46 helicopters, we have one of these on the deck. So these big helicopters can carry a lot more passengers, and some of them are still around. This is actually a aircraft storage area out in Arizona that you can visit today. And I think this aircraft is still there. Surprised it hasn't been taken over by some museum, but I think maybe they like to keep it there because it makes people pay admission to come see it at the museum. Okay. So we're about to finish this up as far as the evacuation goes. We're going to take the seal off the door of the embassy. We're going to take the U.S. ambassador, who's been reluctant to leave so far. His name is Graham Martin. We're going to take him to the USS Blue Ridge. Blue Ridge was the command and control ship for this whole Operation Frequent Wind. We're going to take some of these U.S. Embassy Guard Marines to the USS Okinawa, because that was a Marine ship, okay? And they got no place else to go. So if you don't need to guard the ambassador, now what? Oh, you go to the Okinawa. Okay. We'll find something for you to do, right? Okay, here's some statistics now. 2-day evacuation. Helicopters flew Saigon to Midway for more than 18 hours straight, carrying 60 plus passengers. So, I think some of them got a few more in, especially when it started getting close to the end. 2,074 refugees arrived on the first day, more than 1,000 the next. Midway helicopters transferred some of those passengers, another 1,600 to other ships. And then Midway served more than 6,000 hot meals to the refugees. Some gave up their beds. Did you give up your rack? Okay. So the refugees had a place to sleep. And some just slept on the hangar bed. Okay. And more than 300 received some medical attention while they were on board. Midway wasn't done yet. There's still some aircraft in Southeast Asia that we want to get back. So some of the Vietnamese aircraft flew to Thailand. And so Midway goes to Thailand, picks up those aircraft, loads up the flight deck. Now this is Midway's, I'm going to say, foreign Air Force configuration. Because she didn't have these aircraft normally stationed, and she was going to take them back to U.S. possession. So closest U.S. possession was Guam. So these aircraft stayed aboard Midway till she got to Guam. And then this scene here, this was the famous rescue at sea of the 84 refugees from a sinking ship. And the argument about sinking ship comes down to, well, if the ship isn't sinking, we can't we can't rescue them. Well, okay, then the ship is sinking right now. And the guy pulls the plug out of the bottom of the ship and it starts sinking, right?
What's the date of that?
That date,
75, something.
6 May 1975. 6 May 1975. You asked the question, I got the answer. Okay. Okay. Now what do we do? Well, you find a place to live. But you know, most places aren't ready to take you. So, you know, you land in Camp Pendleton here in California. Well, California doesn't really want you at the time. And that sounds surprising, but that was true. So they put them in places, you know, all over the US. And so I'll name off some of these places here in just a second. But, you know, you can see these big refugee camps were kind of all over the country. Camp Pendleton, California, Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, Eglin Air Force Base, and Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And then they would have people sponsor them, take them into their hometowns. Basically, by sponsoring, that means we're going to basically take them in, we're going to get them jobs, those types of things. A lot of the South Vietnamese basically acclimated quite well to the U.S., and many of them live here in Southern California. So I'd be surprised if you didn't know someone who was a refugee. Other refugees were accepted by Canada as well as European and South American nations. Real asset to our society for sure. More than 7,000 total refugees were evacuated by all the ships of the task force. And you can see the final number, almost 140,000 refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, okay? Now, there is a happy ending, and I want you to see what a happy ending looks like. So that pilot that landed on the Midway, this is the pilot and his family that grew up in the US, and basically the ones that are still with us are basically doing great things, but they all look pretty happy. And then this one officer, this one person you see here, that's actually Captain Chambers, the commanding officer of the USS Midway. So there are happy endings, okay? So I'm going to talk about another happy ending. We got a park that we're building downtown. This gentleman earned a Congressional Medal of Honor during the Pearl Harbor attack. His name was John Finn. He continued to serve throughout World War II. He retired here in San Diego, and he lived to an age north of 100. And so there's going to be a statue of him erected at Freedom Park. Now, what is Freedom Park? This is Freedom Park. We're going to turn that big parking lot next to the Midway into a big park. And there is ample parking around us, but it won't be on the pier anymore. It'll be in the areas around us. And then the last thing I want to tell you is if you have questions, I might be able to provide some answers. But before I get into that, I just want to talk about my three most favorite things. Our mission is to preserve the legacy of Midway and all those who served, inspire our guests, educate about the sacrifice to preserve our freedom, and entertain with personal and memorable stories. So I hope you found this entertaining. And then you can get involved in the Midway a number of ways. Just come down and see us. You can volunteer. You can become one of the many people who decide that we're something to do in San Diego. This is some volunteers. That's a typical watch that I'm missing right now. This is one of those former Air America pilots that flew. He's now a docent. And we even got some World War II veterans. And we have a foundation that's there to support those people. And maybe not them, but maybe their kids too, or their grandchildren, or maybe even their great-grandchildren. And then you could always be a member, and then you don't have to pay anything at all to come see us. And then kids like this that are in your family get to come with you. There are different levels of membership. Okay, questions? That's it.
Stop sharing.
Oh, yeah. I never stop sharing. I just did.
That's a very inspiring story.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I do, it's a very inspiring story.
That helicopter that the guy jumped out of, I've flown helicopters when I got out.
Yeah.
But what that is, it's a rescue operation maneuver, and what this calls hanging the skid. On the destroyers, you didn't have a place to land, okay? So what you did is the helicopter pilot would hover over the edge of the flight deck of the destroyer, okay? No room for anything. So he would drop collective, hang the skid. Now you're putting weight on the skid, and so that the aircraft won't float away. The people evacuate the helicopter. He's loading the skid. He's holding collective over, so everybody's getting out. Once it's done, okay, everybody's clear. He's gonna go ahead, straighten out, pull up, and hover back out over the water, and then jump out. That's what he did. He was a little higher than the guys I saw. The guys I saw would maybe 20, 30 feet, and then he'd kick the cyclic over and jump out the other side.
Sounds like you've done that every time.
Crazy. This is some of the most crazy stuff you could imagine happened then.
Yeah. Very.
All these people have done it, and all these Vietnamese refugees, they did incredibly well in our culture.
I hire every single one of them I can find.
Say again?
I hire every single one of them
I
I
mean,
can
they're
find
raised-
generationally.
Yeah,
I've hired their dads, their brothers and children.
yeah.
So I have a question. Yes, sir. So the original decision not to help the Vietnamese in 1975 when the peace accord was broken. Was that a military decision or what?
No, it's actually by Congress.
Yeah.
You know, I think the military was kind of, I don't think they wanted to go back to Vietnam, but if Congress had told them to, they would have, okay? I'm gonna go with, you know, essentially, there's kind of two sides of the aisle, okay? You had the president who was committed to what we promised to do, okay? So the president really wanted to do it. So he had a caucus of people who were supporting him to do that. But the caucus of people who were supporting the president and doing that were not the majority in Congress. So he never got the majority support in Congress to open up on what I'm gonna call the wound that the Vietnam War had caused between the American public and the military. So I don't wanna, you know, second guess whether that was a good idea or a bad idea, but you know, it was politics. Yeah, like I said.
In terms of the military, did we have the troops and the equipment?
Well, we would have had to come back, so it would have been just like you saw, we would have had to bring ships back, we would have had to bring aircraft back, you know, I mean, again, we had pulled out, okay?
Okay.
And I think one of the reasons that the North bombed Thompson Air Base was because if we did come back, that'd be the place, okay, so it's kind of like when we got out of Afghanistan, if we had kept Bagram Air Base, we probably could have got back in. When we gave up Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, but we weren't coming back.
I'm sorry, I mean, what was the question? I didn't understand.
Whether it was a military decision or a political decision not to help the Vietnamese after the peace accord was broken in 75,
Oh,
you know, and they were invading. South
Military
Vietnam.
really doesn't have a vote.
Well, it does, but it only goes so far. I mean, you'll have the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You would have the National Security Advisor who could advise the president, say, well, this is what it could take. But it's like Operation Frequent Wind. To do anything bigger than that, I mean, again, it would be something that they would just have to string together.
The Operation Frequent Wind was a rescue operation. That's a whole lot easier to stomach. Well, a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I really don't like to get into politics when I get into discussion with them.
Did we have questions from,
How about our Zoom audience? Anybody have questions out there? You're letting me off way too easy.
when are you gonna give this talk again?
I give this talk probably 3 or 4 times a year, but I did want to talk about something else for just a second, and this isn't really a soapbox talk. You know, this is Memorial Day weekend, okay? And we lost a lot of people in Vietnam, okay? And, you know, I know when I was on active duty, a lot of my shipmates were lost, and I just want to, for, you know, just a minute here, I just want to talk about, I was on the USS Nimitz the night that we had an aircraft crash, and we lost 14 of our crew members in the aircraft crash. So it doesn't even have to be a war for somebody to lose their life. So, I mean, when we think about Memorial Day, we're thinking more than just, you know, people who were killed in wars, we're thinking more than just people. I mean, these people basically put everything on the line. I mean, I'll just use Rob's example. You know, he may not have been pulling a trigger, but if he'd gone over the side of that helicopter, he would have been, you know, just as dead as anybody else. So the problem that we have with everybody that serves is that, you know, you don't want to characterize their service on whether or not they were in a war. You want to characterize their service based on their sacrifice. And that's really what I wanted to say. It's, you know, let's remember the sacrifice during Memorial Day of what some have given. And we're right across the street from Miramar National Cemetery. So if you have a minute, drive by there and see all these flags that some Midway volunteers have put in the ground to make it look like it's Memorial Day. And I think you'll be duly impressed. Okay, because we have a lot of people that have worked all day yesterday and today to put those flags in. So take a look.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Come down and see us.
Yeah, come down and see us. We'd be happy to have you.
We will not let you down.
And
Promise.
the nice thing about the ship is that they have elevators and they have
Handicap access.
they have a lot of things that you don't have to climb ladders.
No,
You
I
can if you want to.
I think Edwina was just talking about an exhibit that she wanted to see about engineering and fire. We put in another exhibit in. So if you come to the ship, if you haven't been there in a while, you'll see a lot of new exhibits. Some of these exhibits are very impressive. We are getting a little bit more into the story now that we've got a little bit more money. So the exhibits that we only had money to build when we first opened, okay, the exhibits are a lot better. The aircraft look nicer. We just completely refurbished our FA-18 Hornet, and it looks like it's brand new. It looks like it just came off the showroom floor. And we just got one of these old piston-driven World War II aircraft that served all the way up to the Vietnam War. It's called the SPAD. It just came back from our airwing restoration. It looks great too. So if you're an aircraft fan, and you know, let's just say you don't care much about military, you just like aircraft, well, we got that for you too. Yes, sir.
You said that there are probably a lot of Vietnamese living here who went through that experience. Has there been any attempt to sort of get them together and come
Yes.
to Midway and?
As a matter of fact, we're one of their top places to go, and I'll use the term, they come down to the Midway in busloads. Okay, so, and it's always a really interesting story because when they come down there, they want to talk, you know, they want to share, you know, and it's really a good story. But like I said, you know, yes, sir.
Sorry, did you finish?
I did.
What was the boat, how about the boat people,
Well, I talked about one of the boats, the refugee
Right.
boats.
I
But
mean,
you know,
there was
those
a lot of
boat
people-
refugees continued, okay? And I think you saw the final number was 140,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where that number comes from.
So
that one boat that you see, what happened in Thailand is, the rules of the sea, the international law says that, you know, he pulled up next to us and Chambers, you know, he really understood read the tea leaves, you know, typically was, anything comes near the ship, it's done. So this boat came in, had about 84 personnel, people on refugees on board, slid up next to us. And what we needed to do was we needed to get the tail end of the ship into international waters. That way we could apply the law of the sea to them. So he did that, and they snuggled up to the number 3 elevator. We unloaded everybody. And the rules of the sea at that time said that you could rescue people. The vessel did not need to be sinking, they just needed to be in distress. And so they were hungry, they were dehydrated, we can give them medical care. So we took them in, and for 2 or 3 days, we bandaged them up, fed them up, got everything all good to go. But at that point, you have to return them back to their vessel if it's seaworthy. And so Captain Chambers asked the master at arms of the guy that was running, there was a Marine and a commander that was running that boarding party. And he asked him, Chief, what's the condition of the craft? And, just sent the guys down in there, we checked it, and it's good, she can float. And he called back down, he says, you guys need to check it again. And we were all issued these shotguns or 45 caliber pistols when we're dealing with it's when you have that many people in that kind of a chaotic environment, you don't want anything to get out of hand. So you just kind of keep everything tucked away just in case something happens. And so out come the shotguns down the side of the hull. Captain, she can't float. Done. We got to keep all 84. And the last reunion that we had, Little Saigon up in LA found everybody. And they came down and celebrated with us.
Amazing. Oh, great story. What a great.
All right, well, I don't want to wear on my welcome, but if you have
Very
any more
courageous.
questions.
It was a really courageous thing you
Yeah,
guys.
Is the
very
Freedom
much.
Park open?
Where?
Is the Freedom Park open?
It's being built.
It's been,
it's not too.
So if you go down there right now, you'll see that some old buildings have been leveled.
Yeah.
Some of the lots are the surface of the lots are being prepared. We've actually had to do a lot of repairs on the pier. I mean, I want to be careful how I say this, but somebody was being paid to maintain that pier for years and years and years. And then we climb up underneath the pier and we find that pier had not been maintained at all for years and years and years. So I'm being very careful how I put this, but we have to make the pier right before we can build something on top of it. So
Another little point about Freedom Park is if you saw that whole footprint, each one of those bricks can be bought with your memorial, your donation money. If you choose to do that kind of a thing to support the program, you can buy a little brick, you can buy a big brick, you can put anything you. Someone